Hello students, welcome back. This video will give you a detailed information about complex sentence. So, let's start with extra marks.
Mommy, our English teacher told us there are different kinds of sentences such as simple, complex and compound. But why should there be such variety of sentences? Why do we use complex sentences? If we use only simple sentences, our language becomes monotonous and boring. Just like all other complex structures which are very attractive and functions effectively. A complex sentence too makes our language attractive and effective. Use of complex and compound sentences will enable us to communicate our ideas in a better manner and add beauty to our speech and writings.
We can have very many definitions for a sentence, but this definition is well suited for the present chapter. A sentence is a grammatical unit that comprises a main clause and sometimes one or more subordinate clauses. Before trying to study the complex sentence in detail, let us try to understand what are different types of clauses. There are two different types of clauses known as main clause and subordinate clause, independent and dependent clauses. Main clause. The main clause, independent clause, is a group of words containing a subject and a predicate. The main clause can stand alone as a sentence. The main clause is a sentence by itself because it makes sense by itself. Subordinate clause. A subordinate clause has both a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone as a sentence. On its own, a subordinate clause is left hanging with its meaning incomplete. It must be combined with an independent clause in order to form a complete sentence. Subordinating conjunctions. A conjunction that introduces a dependent clause is known as a subordinating conjunction. Some of the commonly used subordinating conjunctions are after, although, as, because, before, if, since, though, unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while, etc. Before we study complex sentences in detail, let us glance at different kinds of sentences. Simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence. Let us first look at simple sentences. A simple sentence contains only one main independent clause and conveys one complete idea or thought. Example, my daddy has come home. Let us now move on to compound sentence. A compound sentence consists of two or more simple sentences joined with a comma followed by a coordinating conjunction and but, or, not, for, yet, so. Example, her father played the guitar and Jane started dancing. In this sentence, her father played the guitar and Jane started dancing are independent clauses, whereas and is a subordinating conjunction. By a semicolon. A compound sentence can also be formed by using a semicolon. Example, I cut the vegetables, Mom cooked the food. In these sentences, two independent clauses are separated by a semicolon. A complex sentence contains one main independent clause and one or more subordinate clauses. Subordinate clauses generally begin with a subordinate conjunction. Example: although I was tired, I continued the work. In this sentence, although I was tired is a subordinate clause. Here is the explanation. It is a clause because it contains a subject and a verb. It is a subordinate clause because it does not make sense on its own and it can't stand alone. I continued the work is the main clause of the sentence. This part of the sentence is also a clause because it contains a subject and a verb. It is a main clause because it makes sense on its own and it can also stand alone by itself. Let us now look at the structure of a complex sentence. As we have already seen, a complex sentence contains an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. The dependent clause is introduced with a subordinating conjunction. After a dependent clause, a comma is used, which introduces an independent clause. Read this sentence carefully. When Frank Turner performed at the opening ceremony of Olympics 2012, there was a large gathering listening to him. In this sentence, the dependent clause, when Frank Turner performed at the opening ceremony of Olympics 2012, is separated from the independent clause with a comma. Please note that no comma is necessary when the independent comes first. Example: there was a large gathering listening to him when Paul McCartney performed at the opening ceremony of Olympics 2012. In this sentence, the independent and subordinate clauses remain the same, but the independent clause comes first. The position of the subordinating clause in a complex sentence. The subordinate clause in a complex sentence can take either beginning, middle, or end positions. Thus, a complex sentence contains an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. Let us look at some examples of subordinate clause followed by main clause in a complex sentence. When the music started, the children began dancing. Although it was raining, Lily went out without a raincoat. After the wind had stopped, the rain started. There are some examples of main clause followed by subordinate clause in a complex sentence. The old man continued his journey, though he was tired. We will perform well if we practice well. Ruby stopped her work to rest for a while because she was tired. Subordinate clauses can be also put in the middle of the main clause. The following are some examples of the same. Anne, who had a bad cold, sang melodiously. The little baby, who was tired of playing, started crying. Mr. Matthew, who is our principal, likes badminton. Here are some examples of the subordinating conjunction followed by a dependent clause. Please note the various positions of the dependent clause. Here are some examples of a dependent clause at the end, beginning, and the middle of a sentence respectively. The workers grumbled against the employer, although they were treated well. Because he had no money to pay the fees, John could not join for his dream course. The employees, although they were paid well, grumbled against the management. It's now time for you to do some assignments. Are you ready? Complete the sentences below with the main clause to make a complex sentence. Though he was sad because it was snowing. Since I learnt to ride a bicycle. Whenever I feel hungry. Though I have tried